Rooted and Rising family, welcome in. Take a breath. Settle into yourself and allow this message to unfold in its own time. As you're watching, you will see some of the cards that was utilized today or for this reading today on the screen. These set of cards are the heart of the message. I use three different sets of the cards, and when we get into the explanation of the reading, you will understand why. Okay, but these cards, tarot cards, along with the oracle decks, are what's used for kind of the heart or the end or the combination of the message. Okay, the cards that were pulled using the Wicked Tarot deck, inspired by the musical Wicked. So as we move through the message, remember that flowers equals cups, emotions, love, intuition. Yellow bricks equals swords, thoughts, communication, clarity, the mental. Brooms equals wands, action, movement, passion. Coins equals pentacles, stability, real world structure, finances as well. All right. As always, please take what resonates, leave what does not. Put yourself in the message where it applies, but don't put yourself where it does not apply. This is kind of a three-part reading, different dynamic reading. So, Rooted in Rising, there's a portion that's for the Rooted in Rising family, but you may resonate for the portion that is talking about the divine counterpart, and the same thing, vice versa, where you may, divine counterpart may feel more connected with the Rooted and Rising message, and vice versa. So you're going to put what fits with you, and if none of it fits, it doesn't fit. We're not going to make things work where they shouldn't work, right? So again, take what resonates, leave what does not, and put yourself in the category that applies to you. There are three different decks, three different pools used for this one united message, all right? Again, this message is about something deeper, about understanding why this connection feels the way it does now, why this divine connection feels the way it does now, by stepping back into where it began. Okay, so Rooted and Rising, what we are doing is stepping back into the past and learning who we were in the past, or who our divine counterpart was, and our connection together in the past, right? Discovering, in a sense, why now the connection feels so deep, feels out of this world, feels familiar, it doesn't feel new, even though it may be new. That is what we're going to look at today, okay? So we're starting with the Rooted and Rising family, who you were, okay? And once again, always put yourself only where you feel it resonates. If this is Marco is kind of in doggy jail by sitting in my lap for barking at the other dog outside. Although it isn't doggy jail at all, you see, for him. Yeah, so anyway, that is what we're going to do today, right? Very interesting reading today. Put yourself where you fit, okay? I know for some, this may again be story time. Everyone doesn't believe in past life. That's fine. Story time it is for you then. And, picking up what pieces feel like a good story, or tidbits of wisdom or knowledge that you just feel like, hey, that was great information, or something simply to pass the time. And for others, you may really connect with it. All right. Either way, it is fine. It is okay. So put yourself where you fit in Rooted and Rising. If you feel like you connect more with the actual Rooted and Rising portion, fine. If you feel like you connect more so with the divine counterpart portion, take what resonates, right? Take what resonates. Okay. So we start off with Rooted and Rising, who you were. And I want to say this very clearly, because while pulling the cards for this section, I was picking up on very strong male energy. Spirit was giving me very strong male energy, not masculine, male. Like, okay, this is a male, right? And that is what I was sensing very heavily, right? This does not mean that for every single person, it is literally a man. That energy itself, those cards too, are mostly masculine, very masculine heavy cards, structured, responsible, grounded. Um, and I was just feeling, wow, this is a male, right? But you put yourself where you fit, or where you feel like you fit there, okay? Where where you feel like you fit. Uh-huh. I know. All right. So we start off with the King of Flowers. Remember, this is the Wicked Tarot deck from the musical Wicked, right? So King of Flowers represents the King of Cups. All right. And the King of Cups represents emotional maturity, emotional control, and depth of feeling, very deep feelings. The connection was always very strong, very heavy, deep emotional feelings. But and this is also someone who experiences emotions fully, right? King of Cups or King of Flowers. But they don't allow, or you didn't allow, Rooted and Rising, those emotions to overwhelm you. All right. This is emotional maturity, emotional stability, emotional groundedness. All right. Or we would say emotional intelligence. All right. They're calm, or you were calm, balanced, and capable of supporting others emotionally because you were emotionally grounded. All right. So how this shows who you were is, in that lifetime, you were someone who did not react impulsively to emotions. I was say emotional because I'm an emotional person. All right. You understood them. You could sit in emotional situations, whether they were your own emotional situations or they were somebody else's, right? And remain steady. All right. This tells us you were emotionally dependable. All right. And what this would look like in real life is that you may have been someone that people came to for advice, like a counselor, advising people, giving wise counsel, someone who helped resolve emotional conflicts, right? Someone who had to remain calm while others were not. Somewhere people who work in situations like that all day, every day. People who work in the medical field or military, maybe army, places like that where you are put in very emotionally stressful situations, and you needed to be in control of your emotions so that you can make a sound decision. All right. So you carried an emotionally stabilizing presence in your environment. All right. In your environment, in who you were as a person, but in your environment. All right. So we move on to the King of Swords, or the King of Yellow Bricks, King of Swords, right? And what this card means is, I don't think he thinks this is doggy jail. All right. He doesn't. All right. The King of Swords represents logic, truth, clarity, and intellectual authority. All right. This is someone who makes decisions based on reason, right? Because, again, logic, or the mind, mental, has to do with our swords, right? So, again, you were someone who made decisions based on reason, values honesty, and who sees through confusion to what is actually true. Heavy discernment, put it that way, because swords cut through, right? Obviously, air energy whips through things. Swords slice through, right? Very intellectual card. Very very intellectual. But this is the king, so he's very stable in his intellect, mental, mind. But definitely will see through things very clearly, because it means seeing things through clearly, a very clear understanding. Swords can represent clarity. All right, so able to see through confusion, or carries heavy discernment. All right, they can see through. They can cut through the BS, all right? Put it that way, right? And discern what is actually truthful. All right, so this would show that you were a person who was not just emotionally grounded, King of Cups energy, right? Or flowers, according to the deck we used. All right, you were also very mentally sharp. All right, you could assess situations clearly. You did not ignore the truth, because swords will also represent that truth, even when it was uncomfortable. Swords is very direct. It's rational, right? It's not, our cups are emotions. Our swords are very rational. So it may be sharp like a sword and hurts your feelings, but it makes you feel this small. But it's the truth, right? Okay, but they did not ignore the truth, you did not ignore the truth, even when it was uncomfortable, rooted and rising. So this tells us you were someone who made decisions very clearly. You valued truth over comfort, all right? Even if it was uncomfortable, truth prevailed, right? And you saw things for what they were. Again, heavy discerning energy, all right? What this may have looked like in real life, you may have been, once again, an advisor. Swords is very, very communication heavy, strategist, because emotions are, not a part of swords, so they see things very clearly. It's logic. Emotions are over there somewhere. So a strategist or a decision maker, you can make very sound decisions when your emotions are under control, right? Which they are, because you were also King of Swords. King of Cups, right? Someone whose judgment others relied on. All right. This is very leadership energy. All right. So mentally, you were someone people trusted for clarity and direction. All right. Clarity and direction. And then we move on to the one who's, at the very top, the Emperor. This is very masculine heavy cards, right? The Emperor. And what that means is what? The Emperor represents authority. That's leadership, right? Structure, leadership, responsibility. This is protocols. They want order, right? This is the energy of someone who builds systems, all right? Maintains order and takes accountability for people or environments around them, all right? This is heavy leadership energy. And how this shows who you were, right? This is where, Spirit defines your role, is that you were not just someone with strong traits. You were someone in a position that required those traits. Leadership requires those traits. Emotionally sound and grounded, right? Also rational, heavy discernment, mentally sharp, can make decisions that are wise, that are grounded, that are sound. All right. You carried responsibility that affected more than just yourself. All right. You were responsible for maintaining order, maintaining structure, whether that was in family, community, or system. But what I'm getting is very much so, it seems like somewhere out in the community, you were in a position of leadership, all right? So in real life, this could have been head of household or family, but I'm really getting community energy. Someone responsible for land, resources, people, a leader, authority figure, or someone tied to hierarchy, all right? In older context, a ruler, a military leader, look, it's resonating with me. More like a military leader. Someone enforcing structure or maintaining order. All right. But this, very heavy to me, military structure. So your life required discipline, decision-making, carrying weight, whether you wanted to or not. All right. You, rooted in the rising, were in a position of leadership. All right. All right, and then we have a card from the Medicine Woman Oracle deck, Male Principle, M-A-L-E, male, all right? Again, just every card I pulled was very heavy in masculine energy. All right. And that's why I was like, this is a man. And again, however you identify to that is how you identify it. I can't tell you what you identify as. I can't define that for you. You define it for yourself. All right. Medicine Woman Oracle deck, male principle. A step towards reconciling with the masculine is before you. And what this means is this card, excuse my nose vision. This card speaks directly to masculine energy. Once again, just solidifying the tarot. Leadership, control, protection, responsibility. Those military leaders, protection, responsibility. So how this fits to who you were, it's just once again confirming that your soul was working through masculine energy in that lifetime. You are learning how to, and I don't even think it's me learning, you were learning how, but you were excelling in carrying responsibility, leading effectively, balancing authority with emotional awareness. All right, what that again looks like in real life, someone who had to again prioritize duty over personal desire, maintain structure even when it was difficult, make decisions that were not just about you. Everybody wants to be a leader, but Lord, you don't know what you're asking for at times. It's very hard to lead. The responsibility of a leader, very hard to sleep. Everybody wants to be a leader, but they don't necessarily think about what that all entails and the sacrifice that one makes to be a leader, and a sacrifice a leader has to make. Then we move to the Ace of Flowers, which would be the Ace of Cups. All right, and what this card means is, or it represents, a new emotional beginning. All right, at this point, a new emotional beginning happened for you, rooted in rising. Love, connection, or a deep emotional opening that is genuine and meaningful. All right, and how this shows who you were. This is not just about relationships starting, rooted in rising. This shows that despite your structured, responsible life, in leadership, right? An example, you were still someone who could open emotionally, all right, when something real entered your life. You were not closed off to love. You were not closed off to emotions. You were capable of recognizing and feeling something genuine. And what that looked like in real life, at some point in your life, you encountered someone or something that touched you deeply. You felt something different from anything else that you had ever experienced, right? So even with all of your responsibility, you still had the capacity for real connection, all right? You were not closed off to love. You were closed off to foolishness, but not to love. So loving the right one, the right connection, right? Then we have the Three of Brooms, which would be the Three of Wands, right? This represents waiting, foresight, distance, right? And thinking ahead before acting, right? It was about observing and considering long-term outcomes, right? You were someone mentally sharp, emotionally sound. You're also Emperor. You believe in structure, protocols, things being in place, so you're not rushing in. I always call the Emperor the King of Pentacles on steroids, because King of Pentacles, is grounded, earth energy, very grounded, very stable, taking his time, planning, so the Emperor is like that, times 10. All right. So not just rushing in. So considering long-term outcomes. All right. And so how this shows who you were is that, again, you were not impulsive. Leadership energy is not impulsive energy. You did not act on emotion immediately. You paused and you evaluated, especially when something meaningful entered into your life. So what it could look like in real life is when faced with something important, especially emotionally, you step back, considered consequences, what's this all about? Thought about how it would affect your responsibilities, because Emperor will put responsibilities over emotions. And this would show someone who asks, what does this mean for everything that I'm already responsible for? All right. And then we'll move on to an oracle card, healing family lines. Free yourself from secrets. Discover the hidden treasure of your heritage. And so what this means is it speaks to generational patterns, family history, and inherited responsibilities, showing that you were tied to something just larger to yourself, all right? Family expectations, lineage, or traditions influenced your choices, all right? Leadership energy, you're tied to bigger things, all right? It is more than just you. You are thinking of all of those things with every step that you take, even in love, all right? Expectations, lineage, traditions, protocols. How does this fit? How does this work? All of those things, right? So what it could look like is that you may have carried family responsibilities, upheld traditions, dealt with expectations that limited personal freedom. And I, was just feeling like this was something community. So you probably were likely dealing with expectations of others, how it looks to the community, right? Couldn't just up and do what you wanted when you wanted, because you had to I don't want to say save face for community, but you did have image to be concerned about, so you had to be concerned about what others saw and did not see, seen and didn't see. So you had to take all those things into consideration. You couldn't just jump into things because you were visible, very visible. People knew who you were, rooted and rising. And so you had to conduct yourself in a certain way in public. All right. Then we have a card from the Green Witch's Oracle deck, the Earthworm. Clarity, rumination. Yes, you do hear him. He is snoring. What this means is deep thinking, reflection, and processing before action. And how this shows who you were is that you were not someone who, again, just rushed into decisions. You thought about things, all right? You thought about them thoroughly, all right? Completely. All right, again, you spent time reflecting before acting, evaluated situations from multiple angles, made decisions only after fully understanding them, because the sword energy is clarity. All right, you didn't just do something without fully understanding every angle of it. All right. All right. Now, we're going to end this portion, the rooted and rising, who you were in your past life, with the unspoken truth. So this is the unspoken truth in that lifetime to your divine counterpart, that not everyone is meant to stay forever. Some people come to teach you something. That was one card. And then the truth isn't always black and white, all right? So even with everything you carried, all of your responsibilities, you understood that some connections are meaningful even when they don't fully come together, all right? Bottom line is, you knew that there was something very deep, something very different about that Ace of Cups energy. It was something very real. Despite it, however it came together or didn't come together, you knew that this was different. All right, so now let's move on to the divine counterpart. And so where the rooted and rising got a very masculine dominant spread, the counterpart got a very feminine energy spread. Okay, I picked up very female energy, like this is a female. Again, you put yourself in whatever area you feel like represents you the most. Okay, no one's trying to put anything on anybody. You put yourself where you feel represented the most here. That is just what I was picking up for spirit as I was pulling cards for the spread. All right, so we start off with judgment. All right, and what this card represents is awakening, realization, and becoming aware of something deeper. It's a moment where someone begins to see their life differently and understands that something meaningful is unfolding, right? And so how this shows who the divine counterpart was So like in that lifetime, your divine counterpart was someone going through an internal awakening, okay? Coming into the realization of who they really were. So they weren't fully settled in who they were yet in that time. They were becoming aware of deeper truths about themselves, their life, and what they truly felt. But again, they were still in the process of understanding it, all right? So what this would look like in real life, it may have been like them questioning their current life situation, realizing something was missing or unfulfilled, feeling unfulfilled, realizing something, it's something is off a little bit. There's something missing. There's something there's a yearning there, feeling pulled towards something deeper without fully understanding it, or maybe even someone deeper, right? So this was someone who was in transition internally, someone who was waking up emotionally and spiritually, right? Then we move on to the King of Flowers with the King of Cups. This card we seem to get real heavy. Like we get this card a lot in these readings. And again, what it means represents, again, emotional depth, compassion, and the ability to feel deeply. That's where rooted and rising and the counterparts mirror each other with the ability to feel and feel deeply, right? But it also can represent someone who's learning how to manage and understand their emotions. So where rooted and rising, the heavy masculine energy, the emotions were grounded, they were stable. This King of Cups energy here is, it's grounded, but still learning how to manage and understand their emotions. So not as grounded as the rooted and rising in the masculine energy. That's fully in the male masculine energy. Here, they're still trying to manage and understand it. Hence, the Judgment card beforehand is like the realization, coming to terms of who they are and trying to figure that out. They're grounded, but, they're still learning some things there. All right, figuring some things out. So how it shows who they were, it just shows that your divine counterpart felt the connection between you. Divine counterpart felt the connection also very deeply. All right, it wasn't one-sided. All right, however, unlike you, again, their relationship with emotion was not as grounded or controlled. As I mentioned several times, I'm more emotional. It doesn't mean that you're going to see me crying at the drop of the hat. You will rarely ever see me cry. I'll be more stoic in public. I'll cry by myself, okay? All right, you have to be really connected to me to see me drop a tear, Well, I've cried in relationships, obviously, because I'm more emotional, right? So when I get mad, I cry. All right, I angry cry. Angry cry, okay? There's a difference. Anyway, so unlike you, rooted and rising, well, you're more grounded, right? with emotion, their relationship with emotion was not as grounded or as controlled. They were still a bit emotional as they feel deeply, but more expressive. All right, they were still learning to also handle those emotions and what to do with them, I should say. So what it can look like is someone who loved deeply again, but struggled with action. Someone who felt strong emotions, but kept them inside as well, not really revealing. And someone who knew something mattered, but also hesitated to move on it or act on it. So emotionally, they were open and feeling, but not fully anchored in how to act on those feelings. All right. Then we move on with to the Six of Yellow Bricks, the Six of Swords, right? And what that means is, or represents transition. This is still more transitional energy. Moving away from something and leaving behind a situation that no longer serves you. So how this shows who they were is that they were in something already that they were beginning to outgrow, hence the Judgment. They had the awakening, a realization, like, I'm not fulfilled here. They were already beginning to outgrow it. There was a situation, whether it was emotional or physically, that they knew was not fully aligned, but they had not fully left it yet. They were still in it. They were, it's a transition, beginning to move away from it, or at least they were in the realization that this is not what they wanted. So they may not have physically moved away, but emotionally, hence the swords, emotionally moved away from it, right? And this could have been like a relationship they were emotionally distancing from, right? A life situation that they knew was not fulfilling, a commitment they were slowly realizing they needed to move away from, or they desired to do it. So they were in motion, but not yet free. Okay. Again, that could be a connection, a marriage, a family situationship that they knew, okay, this is not fulfilling me, or I'm not happy here. I'm in it. So whether I physically leave, I still have emotionally checked out, you know, or I have begun to transition away emotionally, or I'm not putting my emotions so deep within it. All right. So we move on to the hanged one, or the hangman, right? This represents pause, suspension, being stuck between choices, in a state of waiting where action is delayed, okay? Oh, this shows who they were, in a sense that even though they felt the connection, and that's between you, rooted and rising, and were becoming aware of the connection, they were not in a position to act on it, right? They were stuck between what they felt and what they were tied to, all right? Hence the transition away from something, but it seems to be more of a emotional transition away, you know. They left their emotions aside, but, you know, and transitioned on, but not necessarily physically, you know. So they were still there in whatever the situation was, whatever the dynamic was. They were still physically there. So they weren't free to fully act on what they felt towards you, rooted and rising. So how this shows who they were, again, they felt the connection very deeply, King of Cups. They were becoming aware of it. Of course, realization, something is missing, judgment, but they were not in a position to act, the hanged one. So they were stuck between what they felt and what they were tied to. All right. And again, this is a situation, or what it may look like in real life, a situation that they could not easily leave, like a marriage or a family, feeling torn between two paths, emotionally aware, but physically restricted. So someone who knew that this was real between you two, the connection, the feeling, but could not fully move on it. Especially, you know, in this past life, the timing, if you were already in something, especially as a feminine energy, you know, it wouldn't have been, you wouldn't have been as free to leave a situation. Or if you had a family, you would not be in any usually timeline, you would not be comfortable just leaving it. It's not a decision that you would just make. You know, lots of people stay in situations for different reasons, but women have been known mostly to stay for the family. I don't know why we do it. We will stay miserable for years for the sake of the children, right? Anyway, which is really it's no point for the sake of nobody, because then everybody's just miserable. The children aren't happy. You aren't happy because they feed off of your energy. I'm speaking from personal experience. I don't say, you know, she said it is across the board for everybody's situation. It's not. Been there, done that. They're not happy with it. So you might as well make the decision to be happy. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. That's what the energy is showing in this past life of the divine counterpart, right? Stuck between what they felt and what they were tied to, situation they could not easily leave. Again, tore between the two paths of what they really desired as opposed to what they were committed to, emotionally aware but physically restricted, okay? Felt deeply but couldn't fully move towards it. All right, then we go to the Nine of Cups, right, which is a very good card. It represents emotional fulfillment, right? Satisfaction, something that feels like a wish come true, right? So it shows who they were, is that it shows clearly how they felt about you, rooted and rising. The connection felt like what they truly, truly wanted. It brought emotional satisfaction and a sense of alignment. So where they were in judgment, that awakening, that sense of something missing, the Nine of Cups was the fulfillment of that, feeling fulfilled in what was missing. You were the piece that was missing. All right. And what that could look like, again, being around the connection, being around you or connecting with you felt peaceful. It felt like peace. It felt fulfilling. It felt emotionally light. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't burdensome, right? So while their life may not have been fully aligned, the connection itself was, right? The connection itself was, both parties seem to have realized that even then. That we have the Seven of Wands, right? Seven of Wands represents defense, resistance, and protecting one's position. So how it shows who they were is that they were holding their ground. All right, not against the connection. Again, if the connection felt emotionally fulfilling, a wish come true for them, but in defense of what they already had, they were protecting their current life structure. All right, and it could have looked like staying in, again, a relationship, a marriage out of obligation. All right, I'm committed to it. Holding on to a life they felt responsible for. Again, if you have children or little ones, you're more apt to stay even when you shouldn't. Resisting change because it would disrupt everything. Again, how things also look. If you were both, we know rooted and rising is in a position of leadership, but it doesn't mean the divine connection or counterpart was not in a visible position either. So sometimes it could be also family expectations and what your family expects, especially since this seems to be a very highly feminine energy. You're going to be expected to stay with your husband, especially if you have children. So how it looks to family, how it looks to community, how it looks to outside world looking in, right? So resistant to change because it would disrupt everything. And, you're likely going to get the brunt of it in the feminine energy anyway, if you decide. You're going to follow your heart. I say it like that, but there's nothing wrong with it. All right. They were defending what already existed. We know love is complicated, don't we? All right. So then we move on to the world. It takes courage in some senses to really, to really go for what would really bring you true joy. And a lot of times what's going to bring you true fulfillment, quite frankly, pisses a lot of people off. And you just have to be okay with that, because you've got to live your life. And my mom would say this a lot, they'll get over it. They will. Sometimes they don't ever. You'd be okay with that. But for the most part, they'll get over it. And if they don't, that's their personal problem. But you can't be restricted, and you can't be, in something isn't the best for you, because it is what looks right and it's what other people expect. All right. Didn't mean to go off on that. So we have the world. And this represents completion, closure, and the end of a cycle. And how this shows who the divine counterpart was is that there was a decision made. It represents the decision that was made, in a sense, not necessarily who they were, but they made a decision. And they chose to complete the situation as it was, not by leaving, but by staying and closing the possibility of something else. So in a sense, instead of going towards what they really wanted, what they felt deeply, what really was their wish fulfillment, they chose to stay in obligation. All right. They chose to stay in obligation. It's what that looks like. Cycle was completed. They closed the cycle with you. All right. What it looks like in real life, again, they were committed to staying in their current situation. They chose responsibility over personal desire, decided not to pursue what they felt. They put aside their feelings, basically, and went towards obligation. So this was a conscious choice, not because the connection didn't matter. Obviously, the King of Cups energy says it was felt deeply. The Nine of Cups says it was wish fulfillment, but because their life structure held more weight. All right. They weren't free to leave or move or act on what they really truly wanted, which was you, rooted and rising. All right. Then we have an oracle card, Autumn. Letting go, lightening your load. And what this means is, or represents, release, letting go, and moving forward by putting something down. All right. And how this shows who they were is that they let the connection go, or just shows the choice they made, more so. But not lightly. They understood what they were releasing. Again, you were wish fulfillment. They felt deeply. So this wasn't something that was just, I'll put it down and it meant no big deal for me. This actually weighed heavy on them to put down. And they decided that that's what they had to ultimately do and carry on with what they were already in. And what they knew by judgment wasn't fulfilling emotionally, wasn't fulfilling in any way, but they were obligated and not free. So what it looked like in again, what that looks like in real life is it's sad, isn't it? Staying in a marriage or family situation, but I've been there and done that. So anyway, things to make you go, Anyway, choosing stability over emotional fulfillment. Walking away from what they truly wanted because they felt that they had to. So again, it was not a lack of feeling. This was just choosing obligation over desire. All right. And their unspoken truth in the past life, their past life unspoken truth was, hearing your name still makes my heart race. And you are worthy of love. So this is what they were communicating to you, rooted and rising. You are worthy of love. No proof is needed. So even after choosing to stay where they were, they never stopped feeling what the connection was. Again, from the hearing your name still makes my heart race. So they never forgot you. They never let it go. They never stopped desiring you. They never stopped seeing your worth. And right, again, you were what and who they truly desired. You were the one that made them truly fulfilled, truly not just happy, at peace and joy. You were their world in a sense. All right. So we can move on now to who you were, rooted in rising, divine connection, counterpart to each other, together. You can see decisions were made, but separately, kind of who they were. I think the first reading went more so in who rooted in rising really was. I don't know, almost career wise or structurally wise, and then the other one just kind of was who they really were in as far as making, more their emotions or their awakening or the decision making in a sense, and who kind of made the decision to say no or just, put the connection on hold, more so than kind of like who you really were, as in like, this is who you were in the past life. Divine counterpart section kind of went through that, more like just an awakening and realization, but stayed in obligation. But it's a very feminine heavy energy. And it kind of makes sense because, again, depending on the timeline, women weren't always always in structured careers, right? So it's why it seems like her obligations were more so towards her family, which was, she likely had a family, and that's where mostly her obligations were there, and what she was supposed to do, who she was already with. So whatever the family approved for her. And you got to remember, in some timelines also, you didn't have much choice in who you were with anyway as a woman. A lot of times your father or whoever was head of the household, whatever male, whether, if your father was gone, was a uncle or a brother, the eldest of whoever, made the decision on who you were with anyway. So she wasn't free to likely make the choice to, not as free to make the choice in what she wanted really anyway. But this is who you were to each other, okay? We started off with the sun. We know that's it. Look at me. You can just get bright by the sun. What the card means, of course, the sun represents joy, right? Warmth. Remember, you were with wish fulfillment for the more feminine energy, and King of Cups. Both energies felt King of Cups. So it represents joy, warmth, clarity, genuine happiness, right? Just genuineness. All right. And how that showed in your connection in the past is that the connection felt natural and light and real. All right. It brought light into both of your lives. All right. It wasn't heavy. It was a very light, joyful, genuine connection. So what it would look like or feel like in real life would be, again, easy, warm, familiar, a knowing of each other, whether you just met each other. Even in that time, the connection was very easy, very light. There was no confusion about how the connection felt. All right, then we move on to the Page of yellow bricks, or the Page of Swords, which represents communication, curiosity, real focused learning, and, curiosity and learning, right? So how it showed up in your connection then was that you got to know each other through conversation and observation. Again, swords is communication. All right. Page energy is learning energy. So that's the Page of Yellow Bricks or Page of Swords, where you're learning each other through talking and observation and conversation and communication, right? The connection built mentally and intellectually. So it was a deep connection. It wasn't just emotions. All right. And so what that would look like, again, talked often. All right. Modern day texting and calling, right? Talked all the time, learned about each other slowly, built a connection through shared understanding. All right. Then we have the Seven of Coins, which would be the Seven of Pentacles. And that represents investment, patience, waiting on something to grow. So how that would have showed in your connection, which would be time and energy, obviously invested in the connection, right? You're talking all the time, getting to know each other, getting a clear understanding of one another, learning each other, right? And so this is the investment energy, Seven of Pentacles, time and energy invested in the connection. And it also required patience, investments require patience. So it would look like waiting, or even waiting for the situation to change. Hope something would develop, all the talking and getting to know, investing in the connection, would be waiting for the investment to pay off in a sense. So hoping that things would grow and develop further along than what they were. Waited for the situation again to change and put emotional energy into something that wasn't fully unfolding, is also how it could have looked, which we know it kind of turned out that way, right? So yeah, putting the emotional energy in something that also wasn't unfolding is also representative of that card. Unfortunately, right? Unfortunately. So then we also will move on to the Wheel of Fortune. Wheel of Fortune. And again, that represents cycles, destiny, and things coming back around. All right. And how this would have shown up in the connection is that it wasn't a random connection. It was part of a cycle, something that was meant to return. All right. So in a sense, the Seven of Pentacles seems like an investment was put into something that wasn't going to, give a return in a sense, but it did. It just wasn't in that lifetime, if that makes sense. Wheel of Fortune says it was a cycle, right? So the investment energy was put in for a reason, but it did not play out in that lifetime. So I may have felt at that time, I'm just clarifying again, the Seven of Pentacles, at that time that it was just an investment, or the energy and time was put into something that wasn't going to fully unfold, or just nothing was going to come of it. Because eventually it seemed like nothing did. But Wheel of Fortune is saying, no, it just represented a cycle, destiny, and things coming back around. All right. It did not fully close. All right. It was a cycle, if that makes sense. Not like the world, where it came into completion, like we pulled previous came into completion. This says, it just represents a cycle where it's not today, but perhaps tomorrow in a sense, right? So how it showed up in connection is that, again, this was not a random connection. It was part of a cycle, something meant to return. So what it would look like is what it looks like now, that even if it did not fully come together, which we learned with feminine energy, made the choice to stay in her current situation or their current situation in the feminine energy's situation. And so even if it didn't fully come together, which we get the sense that it did not feel finished, unfinished, right? Undone work. It was left unfinished. The cycle did not complete. All right. So what we move on again, after we learn that it just didn't feel finished. So we move on to justice, because we're going to we'll wrap it all around in a minute here. Justice is what the card means, is balance, truth, and fairness. So how this shows in your connection, again, what did not align in that lifetime is meant to be balanced in another, is what I'm getting at. So it didn't align in that lifetime. So we're pulling cards that are letting us know in this lifetime it's not balanced, but it is coming. It is meant to cycle back around. All right. So what it would look like in real life is that there's a sense that things were not fully resolved, which we know that they're not. All right. Then we get the Four of Flowers, which would be the Four of Cups. So the Four of Cups represents missed opportunities and hesitation. So this is, again, stuff. This is what's going on in the past life between you two. All right. How it shows in your connection at that time is something meaningful was present, but it was not fully taken. All right. Again, that Four of Cups, missed opportunities and hesitation. Traditional tarot deck. The man is sitting underneath a tree, kind of withdrawn in a way, isolated, to himself. So how it would have shown in the connection is something meaningful was present, but again, it was not fully taken. All right. Hence, feminine's energy, or feminine deciding, not to go any further. So what it would have looked like, again, hesitation, held back, some, just energy and emotions and things held back and not fully acted on what was there. All right. So we had the getting to know each other. We had a lot of that. We had the Seven of Pentacles, investment energy, putting the time and energy into something. The likelihood rising would hope would have given them the return of something deeper. Feminine energy saying he's kind of pulling back, saying no, in a sense. And ultimately we learned what that decision was. All right, and again, something meaningful was present, but it wasn't taken. And then we move on to the Nine of Brooms, and what that means, or the Nine of Wands, it represents guarded energy and emotional fatigue, and how this would have shown in the connection. Again, there was exhaustion, emotional or situational, that made it difficult to move forward. All right, and that means both of you, both divine counterpart, rooted in rising, might have been dealing with responsibilities or situations that made action difficult. Again, rooted in rising is in a position of leadership, so you have all those responsibilities, expectations, all those eyes on you, and divine counterpart is already tied to some other obligation as well. Okay, so guarded energy and emotional fatigue would be there, and then they're trying to figure out how to come together, or if they can come together. So you have a bit of guardedness going on. And then we move on to the Six of Brooms, right, which is the Six of Wands, and that represents recognition, acknowledgement, and knowing. All right, and how that showed up in the connection is both recognize what it was, even if it was not spoken. All right, what it would have looked like would that there was just an unspoken understanding that this matters. This is real. This is really important to me. This is really deep. This is significant. All right. Then we have our Romance Angel Oracle deck. New love. A new person has stirred your romantic feeling. All right. That's just stating that at first, at the beginning of this connection, it stood out as different. It stood out, again, something important, something significant, something genuine, but ultimately something different. There was just something about you two that was just, not the same as others. You could have had other connection, but it's just not the same. Or you could have met other masculine, feminine energies, but there was something about you, rooted in rising and divine counterpart, that was just different. It stood out. All right. Then we have trust from that same deck. This situation is calling for you to have faith. All right. And this deck is just pretty much, to me, not talking of the past, but talking of even now. All right. There's a need to trust what was being felt. there was a need then, but there's also a need even now, you know. And the same thing with the first one where the connection stood out as different. Again, cycles. There was a need even, it stood out then and it stands out now. That's why it's the same now. It's different. Something very familiar, something very deep, something very different about that person. Something about them just grabbed you like that one. And I can't explain it, and I don't know why. I don't know why they feel familiar. I don't know that I've ever recalled ever meeting them. You know, there's something about that masculine energy, the feminine energy just stands out. All right. Then also very soon, clearly decide what you want so that it comes to you now. A decision was required and it was not fully made. All right. The feminine made the decision to stay in what she was in. But again, we have her in her oracle unspoken truth, again, saying once again, your name still, you know, had so much weight on her heart. All right. And even of saying, you know, no matter what, no questions asked, you deserve love. It was just a love that never left her. All right. She never stopped thinking about the connection that never unfolded fully because she wasn't allowed to step into it. And it was a cycle that never completed. So in this lifetime, guess what you're doing, right? So in closing, all right, this is why when the connection showed up in this lifetime, it did not feel new because it wasn't. It wasn't new. This was something that had already lived, already formed, already meant something, right? Even if it didn't fully come together, then cycles come back around for completion so that you can complete it. And now what you're experiencing just is not attraction alone. It's there. Or curiosity or coincidence. It is recognition. It is soul recognition. Like, I know you. Right? It's the continuation of something that never actually ended. It wasn't supposed to end. It just paused. It just shifted and found its way back in a different time, under different circumstances. What does Erykah Badu says? I guess to see you next lifetime, right? Where she had the same situation. All right. She was in love. So, oh, there's something about this one, but she was already with someone else. So she said, I guess I'll see you next lifetime, right? Because she recognized there was something about that gentleman that she recognized, right? Right? So she said, I guess I'll see you next lifetime, right? But this time, right? This time the question isn't, what is this? This time around, the question is, what are we going to do with it now, right? So now it's all brought back to be completed. You know, whether it completes together or separate, it is another opportunity for two divine energies to come together and wish fulfillment. It is that opportunity again, but again, there's choice. And so both in this lifetime, or you put in situations, you know, where they have to learn and they have to grow and they have to get past some things and let some things go. But ultimately, they both will be able to act on what they could not act in the past. But it's still a choice, all right? It's still the choice that matters. So, again, what are we going to do with it now? As always, stay rooted, stay rising, and aligned with all the divine gifts ahead.